Welcome back, everyone. We're here again with the Svelte Sirens, and I'm trying to think of an alliterative term that we can use for Svelte Sirens because Svelte Sirens Talks isn't doing it for me anymore. Like, I need, I don't know, I was thinking like Svelte Sirens Sit Down, or I just need to come up with an S name. But, anyways, today we have Danny with us to give us the unofficial story behind the unofficial Svelte newsletter, although it is kind of the official newsletter at this point. But I am going to hand it off to Danny. Give yourself a brief introduction, Danny, and I will remove myself and let you have it.
Sounds good. Thanks so much, Brittany, and great to be here. Really love Svelte Sirens and all the things that y'all do for the community. Hi, I'm Danny. Currently, I'm the director of design at a company called ChipperCash, but I'm moving companies soon, so keep an eye on my Twitters if you're interested in that. And I am the writer of the Svelte newsletter. As Brittany mentioned, it is the unofficial Svelte newsletter, and we'll get into a little bit of reasons as to why that's the case throughout the conversation today. But what I wanted to do is kind of just open up the world of writing this newsletter, where it started, how it got to where it is today, the way to get on the newsletter if you're interested in being showcased, as well as kind of like the future of the newsletter and maybe a call to action to some of the folks who are watching this right now or watching the recording. So without further ado, I'd like to dive in and just talk about what inspired this newsletter. It all started with listening to the Svelte radio podcast. I was listening to a conversation in May of 2020, walking the dogs, listening at 1.5 speed, the classic, keeping up with Svelte. And, Sean said this really interesting thing that I wanted to share. And kind of, that's what kicked off this whole thing. And I think it's a good way to kind of put us in a place and time, mid-pandemic when we were all, learning how to stay up to date without conferences or anything like that. So I'm hitting play right now, and hopefully you can hear it.
I'm helping to solve those first issues because I haven't done that much. But one thing I am looking for is like some sort of roadmap. I think there can be a lot of perception. This is a lot of my wheelhouse, like perception momentum, right? Like in much the same way that we have problems, so like we have merging of stuff in, but we don't really have like major versions or not major versions, minor versions where we actually sort of boot features up and say like this is a new thing in Svelte, everyone please know about it, and then having some sort of progression and direction, like this is what we're building for the next 6 months and 6 to 12 months, and having people rally around that.
So I thought that was super interesting, because I felt the same way as a person who, has used Svelte to prototype different things as a designer. I don't really know anything about the compiler. I don't know how it works. I just use it to kind of make fun projects and make things, happen. And so I was actually building an application, at the time, and was feeling the same way. Like, hey, I know Svelte kit's coming down the pipe. I know that like there are some, updates every once in a while, but I don't know. I just kind of keep my package.json to latest and just hope nothing breaks. And I think that, Sean made a really great point there that, there isn't this like rallying point, a place to point out like, hey, here's the cool stuff that we've done, so far. And here's maybe what's coming up. And I figured, you know what? I know how to write. I read the release notes. I can just like look at, what's in the changelog and just summarize what's going on. Do my best as someone who doesn't really understand the compiler, and maybe just get a little bit closer to the community. So that's what I did. And I'm going to go ahead and actually stop sharing my screen and reshare so you can see, kind of what goes on behind the scenes. So I am going to share my screen. And let's see here. I use Firefox to kind of keep everything straight. I use tree style tabs to keep track of everything I'm going to show you right now. And to start off, I'll show you that first post that I did. This was in June of 2020. I said, hey, y'all, I'm starting a Svelte newsletter to cover all the great work that the community is doing on a monthly basis. And I linked to that first post. I said, I heard in the Svelte podcast that it's hard to make a big deal about new features since things move incrementally. So I figured a month at a time would be a good cadence to look back on the new features, bug fixes, and things posted in Showcase. That was kind of the mandate that I gave to myself. New features, bug fixes, and things posted in Showcase. Mostly because selfishly, that's all the stuff that I cared about. I think there is a lot that goes on, especially now that Rich is working full-time on Svelte, and it's really hard to keep track of what's going on. Even back then, in this case, June of 2020, I was, had a hard time keeping up. And so I kind of created this schedule for myself and this process that I'm going to take you through right now that really allows for, everything that, has happened in the last month to actually be captured in the newsletter. So you'll see here I have a crap ton of tabs already open on the left side here. These are the main 3 places that I look on a monthly basis, starting off with the Svelte organization, which has mostly activity in Svelte and Kit, but also activity in the language tools. I also just take a quick peek through everything else to see if there's anything that popped up. Sometimes, there's a big site change. For instance, there was a new rollout of the Svelte community website. So I wanted to make sure I captured that, and I was able to just see it, in this repositories list. But usually just diving into the Svelte changelog, as well as the Kit changelog, which is a little buried. You might see it's actually up here. It's in Kit, Packages, Kit, Changelog. And what I usually do is just look at the history and the last thing I talked about in the previous newsletter, and then just keep track of that here. Let's see, I have an anchor link to next 324, which is the most recent one. And I just scroll up and capture the stuff that has happened in the last month. What this normally looks like is something like this, where I have a date, month, year, and have what's new in Svelte of that month. I make up a description that summarizes everything, which at the first is just TBD until I write the whole newsletter. And then I start to capture, similarly, a summary here at the top, and then by package, pretty much, call out what's new. So what's new in Svelte, what's new in the language tools, and what's new in Svelte Kit. If there's some bigger deal stuff that's happening in one repository or another, I might change the order of these just to make sure that the thing that people care about the most is actually captured. So last month, for instance, we had this pretty big deal, the Svelte element release. And so what's new in Svelte ended up going at the top, as well as the language tools that kind of went with it, because that seemed like a really big deal and wanted to make sure that I captured that. But let's take a step back and take a look at the history again. So you can see here that we've got 2022 all the way back to, I think, my first one that I committed to the repository was in October of 2020. But I started this in June, right? So what happened between June and October to actually get this on the website? Well, that was a conversation that happened, I guess, across a number of channels. We were noticing that people were starting to subscribe. And it was getting a little confusing as to where you should look, right? Should you look at this unofficial Svelte newsletter, which pretty much captures everything that's in the changelog, as well as some of the things in the showcase, which I'll dive into how I edit those in a moment. And or should folks look at the svelte.dev website, where there's a blog and people are trying to follow that blog? They subscribe via RSS. And this disparity, this difference, started to really be noticeable the more consistent I was, right? Every single month I was posting, I was sending these newsletters out via Substack, and we were getting a large number of views. I mean, if you look at this, just the first post, we had 565 views. It started to change over time. August, for instance, went down. We had a big number in September, and it kind of fluctuated back and forth, but there was a consistent reader base. And the subscribers over time just continued to grow and grow and grow and grow and grow. We'll do all time here, so you can kind of see how basically every month you'd see a big step up of people subscribing, wanting to get next month's newsletter. And apologies, I accidentally put people's emails on there. My bad. But yeah, so basically, what we were noticing in the subscribers, clicking up and people kind of having conversations with maintainers and people in Svelte Society, that it was like, hey, I don't know where to look. I'm looking in my inbox for this unofficial Svelte newsletter, but I try to send it to my friends, and I feel like we're splitting the community a little bit. And I heard that, and I wanted to, basically try something out. So I went to the pull requests. I asked, hey, does it make sense for me to just contribute this back to svelte.dev? And, created a PR the same way anybody would contribute anything else. And, had that conversation back and forth with the maintainers. Rich even chimed in and gave some clarity on some changes. And that kicked off basically the more collaborative process of building a newsletter. So where at first it was just me editing, posting on my own, not really having lots of interactions with the maintainers or with members of the community, by creating a pull request about a week before, and actually my bad, I'm a little bit late this month, but by creating the pull request about a week before the actual date we're going to post it, we actually can get feedback from the community. So here, similarly, I was very tight, and we ended up merging this a little bit after the day that I sent out the newsletter. But over time, similarly, gotten more consistent. So we started to merge, at a normal time. Here, for instance, I created a PR last May on April 25th. That gave us enough time to kind of go through, look at what was in the PR. Ben, Jeff, etc. Everyone was looking through the PR and double checking my work. Like, hey, there's some awesome stuff that you forgot to showcase. Or, hey, this bug fix actually doesn't sound very good. And so on and so forth. And I love this. Not only do they catch typos like this, me typing OT instead of TO, stuff that I would have just sent out to hundreds of subscribers, but also I get a chance to make sure that the most important stuff is covered. At the very beginning of SvelteKit's changelog, I had no idea how to read the changelog. And Ben was amazing at just chiming in and saying, hey, I think you might have missed this. It was buried in this release note, or it was buried in this patch note. And that was instrumental in making sure that the content that was in the newsletter actually represented what was going on that month. So where are we at today? Well, we've got a lot going on. We've got a newsletter once a month. As I mentioned, I create a PR about a week before, and I also post in the contributing channel. If I go to contributing, you will see a post from me every single month that says, if I can find it, a lot has happened since I last posted. There we go. First draft of the newsletter is up. Feel free to comment, edit, nitpick. All are welcome. If you have a showcase thing that I missed, you can post. You can add to the PR and ask it to be added. If there is a thing in the changelog that I might have missed, or just typos, please feel free to contribute, because that's how this newsletter gets better. Now, part that most people are wondering is, how does the showcase thing actually happen? I actually hear this all the time when it gets posted to Hacker News, or when it gets posted to the what's it called, the Reddit, that folks will ask the question. Let's see if I can even find it here. How do things get added to the showcase? So what I normally do, as you can see, is I have a bunch of tabs open. Essentially what I do is I go into the Reddit. I sort by top this month. So thanks, community, for upvoting things. And then I open literally anything that had some substantial amount of upvotes. In this case, it was 10 or above, which is pretty significant. Some of these are just questions, so they end up not really being relevant. Although one time I did post a question that had a lot of really good conversation in it, and I just posted straight to the Reddit and said, this is a great conversation, people should get involved. But most of these are things that people are showcasing, right? They are questions like they are either libraries, or they are particular applications or websites built with Svelte, and that's all amazing. If it has a GitHub link, it's more likely to get into my newsletter, because people are interested in how the sausage is made. And I've heard feedback that if I post a GitHub link, people are more likely to click it. And in addition, if there is something novel about the idea, for instance, if it's yet another UI kit, yeah, I'll probably post it. It sounds interesting. But if it's something that's never been done, I don't know, some WebGL visualization library that breaks computers, that's definitely going to be in the showcase. So the more novel something is, it's going to be in the showcase. The more polished something is, for instance, it's got a README, it's got some documentation around it. It's going to end up in the showcase. But really, I would love some help with editing. If anybody has stronger opinions on what should go in the newsletter, for instance, what qualifies as a good showcase item, then you're more than welcome to chime in. My email is available in lots of places, as well as you can hit me up on Discord. But the Reddit isn't the only place where I find things. There is an amazing community in our Discord that I get a lot of amazing showcase items from. Some of them are duplicative, and that's okay. Other things, though, if I go back to the showcase, you can see that I basically go through and open every single thing that's posted in the showcase in a new tab. This is everything that's posted in the last month. And then I go through every single one of these and I check, like, okay, is there that level of documentation? Have I posted this before? I don't want to accidentally post something more than 1 month in a row. Is this actually built in Svelte, which most things are, so on and so forth. From there, I then group them into different items. Some of these are pretty static groups. They just are things that end up, being consistent month to month. So apps and sites built with Svelte, for instance, learning resources. This one actually ended up being a relatively new category. I'd say in the last 6 months, I added this and broke it up into to read, to watch, etc. Since they were kind of getting mingled with other showcase items, and blog posts were coming out a lot. So learning resources ended up being a category that I've created, and libraries, tools, and components. These sometimes get split up into starters or UI toolkits and things like that, because there's a lot of similar things that get posted in a month, but sometimes it's just one big dump of ideas. Most of these descriptions come straight from people's GitHub repositories. So if I look here, for instance, if I were to cover Svelte feathers, which I probably will, I'm going to go ahead and just copy this and put that exact description into the content by default. But of course, sometimes, for instance, Svelte.js, that's not the way that we usually describe Svelte. We usually just say Svelte, capital S. And so, there is some editing that I do to this to create consistency. And shout out to the maintainers for pushing me on that. I think that was the right decision. So that is basically how I create Showcase. Some things are straight up applications. Others are, libraries. This really anything and everything can be in the Showcase. As I mentioned, I do have this threshold of quality. Sometimes people just post work in progress, which is great. That's what the Showcase is for. But when we bring that showcase to the newsletter, that's when we start to ask, okay, is this ready to share, or should we kind of wait to give this person feedback and to give them the hug of death that comes with, being posted on a showcase until maybe it's a little bit more polished. So that's a decision that I've kind of made on my own. But as I mentioned, I'd love for folks' opinions on this if they have it. Looking at resources, it's the other source that I get. It ends up in the same tab because there's a lot of overlap, I'd say, in showcase and resources. So it's in this same tag group. And I'll be going through all of these probably later tonight. So people have enough time to read through my PR over the weekend. But essentially, at the end of all of this, let's see here. This is going to be, about 100 or so tabs to look through. I end up with something that looks like this. This is May's newsletter. We've got title, description, author is myself, and the URL to find us. Here we have these headers, and of course we have the showcase. Let's get to the most fun part, which is posting. And then I will open it up for questions. So posting. We talked about creating a PR. The PR is where kind of all the editing happens, across the community. Definitely love as many people as possible to contribute to this. I will post the draft, and then folks can edit or add comments as they want. And once we get to a place where it feels pretty good, I just easily hit view file, and I copy all the content, it pastes very nicely into a new post in Substack. And then I schedule this post. You're going to let me do it? Yeah, okay. Then I schedule this post by putting my little header on it and scheduling it for the first of the month at, let's see, I'm in Mountain Time now, so 7 a.m. And the reason why I post it is most people read their email in the morning. If people have opinions on when we should post this, also open to that, because I just randomly decide what time this should get sent out. But as you can see here, this is still technically an unofficial Svelte newsletter. And it's unofficial in the sense that it's posted on the svelte.dev website, but it's not written by a maintainer, right? It's written by a member of the community. It's unofficial in only so much that if I go anywhere, I don't know if this will get taken over by anyone. Technically, Kev, shout out to Kev, is an admin of the svelte.substack.com. So, if something does happen to me, hopefully, fingers crossed, nothing does, then there will be someone who can help own this going forward. But I would love some volunteers to take the bus factor up from 1 to maybe 2 or 3. So if anybody is listening to this and thinks, wow, this is super interesting, I want to be involved in this, please start off by, looking for this PR and adding your thoughts and comments. And if you feel like this is something that you want to start contributing to, as in, writing the first draft of, and we can kind of share, authorship rights, kind of going back and forth, maybe one person does 1 month, one person does another month, whatever makes sense to you, I would love that. I think the purpose of this, conversation was twofold. One, to be very open source about this. This shouldn't be some hidden secret black box. People should know how to get on this newsletter, but also to be open to other people wanting to contribute to this. A big thing for me is I'm a designer. I do not understand how the compiler works for Svelte, but I want to be a part of this community, and I love being a part of this community. And this was a great entry point for me, because all I had to do was know how to write and read release notes, which is something that pretty much anyone can do. So I really appreciate everyone's openness and everyone's showcase items. Your ability to contribute to this is definitely something that I admire. I love seeing the contributions every single month, and this really gives me joy as I'm going through all the work that people do to see what's been built in Svelte and what is being built by Svelte. Yeah, that's a hard sentence to say. But yeah, that's I guess a summary of the Svelte newsletter and all I wanted to share today. I really appreciate everyone's time, of the people who have watched, and I love to answer any questions if people have it for anything I just talked about.
For sure. I actually want to talk a little bit about what you just mentioned with open source contributions and getting some help, of course, but people may not realize this is a great way to get into open source, like to be a contributor to Svelte. Like, this is a good stepping stone, and it's similar to docs changes. Like, you go in there and you review PRs and you get used to that workflow. So this would be a great stepping stone. If anyone wants to get involved, for sure they should contact you. And you mentioned briefly there at the end, I actually wanted to ask you a question on something that you mentioned before we started, that you don't have a developer background. So what have you learned, and what has that process looked like for you?
Yeah, sure. So I have learned a lot, but yeah, I mean, a little bit about my background. I went to school wanting to study computers, but quickly realized that it wasn't the best fit for me. I had a hard time following requirements and specs. My professors in school were like, in the real world, you'll have to follow specs to the letter. And I'm like, it sounds terrible. So I ended up going into design. It was a good fit for me. I learned a lot about research. I learned a lot about the ways that people interact with technology. And I think that's a lot more of my headspace, figuring out how to best design products for people, and then working with engineers to make sure that those things happen. So I think I learned a lot about a lot of nitty-gritty details, things that I don't realize are so important to me as a consumer of just like the basic HTML, CSS, JavaScript. I mean, those are things that like I feel comfortable with as a designer. And when we get into one of those more detailed things about like, oh, do this for more performance reasons, or we have to do this because there's like a race condition here, like all that goes over my head and it gets really scary. And I think that like when I see the maintainers explaining things in PRs and having conversations, like debates with each other about like, hey, this is going to be the best for this reason. I think this matches this use case. It really comes to appreciate. I really come to appreciate like how much value I get out of that, right? As someone who doesn't usually see how the sausage is made and just gets to be like, wow, yummy sausage. At the end of the day, I am now significantly more grateful for all of the time and effort and really like energy and design that goes into building a great API. Like I can just tell being a user of Svelte 3 that like people have really thought through this. And
it's still design, right?
Important.
Like it's
exactly.
Design of infrastructure. It's just a little different. And I have a graphic design background, so I was very similar coming into this. And then I got into HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and I'm like, this is like bringing my designs to life, and I loved it. And so I dove more into like that front end development space. But I love that. Did you know Markdown before though, or had you used Svelte, or was it just similar enough to HTML, CSS, and JavaScript?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. My first job was at a startup as a front-end developer, and I was very bad at it. So I immediately, after about a year of breaking production, I, started to go into more of a design role and kind of crafted that role at the company as we hired people who were significantly better at writing code than me. So I think like there was that level of experience of just like, knowing enough to get by, knowing enough, as you said, to like bring my ideas to life. And it really wasn't until, I would say like started to do more side projects that I wanted to reach for something really easy and accessible. I tried building a lot of side projects with React, and, I had to kind of break through the abstractions a lot to get the thing that I wanted. And the moment I got into like, hooking in refs and all these things, like I started to get really overwhelmed and realized like I was out of my comfort zone. And I just wanted to build a cool thing, right? So, Svelte was a great thing to reach for. That was like, hey, I don't have to dive into too many details. I can just kind of write the components the way that I've basically drawn them out in Figma or drawn them out in a sketchbook. And that's good enough. Svelte will do a lot of things for me. Animation, for instance, is a big one that like in React, I was pulling my hair out, just trying to get something to animate from the left to the right. And, in Svelte, it's built in. So it's just the little things like that, right? Where as someone who's not super duper technical, I had a great on-ramp from my skill set as opposed to trying to dive into the deep end like with other frameworks.
I completely agree. It's the lowest barrier to entry. I actually did a workshop yesterday called Starting with Svelte, and I was like, you can go through the free code camp tutorial in your browser. You don't even have to use the command line. You don't have to use VS Code or anything. You can just use like StackBlitz, the SvelteKit.new, or you could use Svelte.new or something and just go through the free code camp tutorial, and it's just HTML and you don't have to know anything else. And it's crazy that it just works. And I completely agree. I kind of got a little sidetracked there. Before I ask you my last question, unless anyone else has questions, will you link in the private chat the GitHub repository so I can post that out to everyone, and I will link your Twitter. And then I have a question about the email client that you use, because it looked like you were able to just copy. Was it Markdown that you're copying and then pasting that into Substack, or how does that process work?
Oh yeah, so Substack is great, but the
Spanish Twitter I'm linking out right now.
Thank you. What I use, or the repository that I use is just a fork of the Svelte repo. So really anybody can contribute. I'll just quickly link to the PRs where it's just my authorship of PRs. But really when I'm contributing, I just reset hard upstream and just go from there. So it really is just straight in the Svelte repo that I'm.
You may do more Git than I do. Like I've never used reset. I have used reset a couple times, but hard upstream sounds like
Oh yeah. Well, upstream is my name. It's what I named. It's what I named this.
Oh, okay. Repo. I gotcha.
But yeah, so let me show you just a little bit the Svelte. What's it called on Substack? So Substack is great for this reason that like you can just paste in any formatted text and it will work. So what I normally do, if we just look at May's newsletter, for instance,
So you had Markdown originally in your
so this
editor.
was just in VS Code. This is all Markdown.
Okay.
And even then, I'm using there's a plugin that I use called Markdown All-in-One.
Yes, I use that too.
So easy, if I need to, like, for instance, take a link and then make this.
Did you know it will do a table of contents too? If you just type in, I think it's TOC or something at the top. Yeah, it will do a table of contents. Maybe that I don't.
I'll have to look that up. That sounds awesome. But yeah, so basically, what I do is once I've written it all in Markdown, then I, put it into the PR. Here, it's going to look like a new file, and people can, like, make comments, etc. And when we're done, I hit View File, which turns it into, rich text formatting, and just copy and paste right over. So boom, here's my title. Boom, here's my description. Here's my description. And then I just drag.
And you just got to do the
copy. And there we go. And
I was going to say email formatting is like the bane of most people's existence. And this is like so simple. And you just went straight from Markdown to that rich text format, copy, paste, done.
Yeah, one time I was on the road and I totally forgot to post the newsletter, and it was the day of, and the PR had already been merged, so it was on svelte.dev, but no one had gotten the email, and I was like, oh no, I'm in a car. What am I going to do? So I pull out my phone and I literally select all of my phone, and I copy and I paste, and it worked. And I was like,
and
oh my
goodness, worked. That is so fantastic. Great.
So yeah, it was very. It's been a time saver significantly.
Substack is the name of that, right? Substack.com.
Yes, and as I mentioned, Kev's got admin, privileges to the Substack, so we can always add more contributors to it as we need to. It, as I mentioned, is the unofficial, email newsletter. We were talking about ways at some point in both the contributing channel and on the GitHub. On like, oh, how should we email this out? Should we start doing like our own email service? And we all just kind of decided, like, it's too much to maintain. Substack's got it all built in. So
I know.
That might change in the future, but for now, Substack is the email.
Yeah, that is a great client. I'm going to have to check that out. I've heard so many ups and downs with newsletter clients. So this sounds really great. And I don't think we had any more questions. So I think we're all set unless you have anything else you want to add.
I think one last thing I want to say is thanks again, Brittany, for putting together Svelte Sirens. It's so great to see all the amazing people we've been able to bring in, because we as a community are inclusive of others. As myself, who is part of that group of others, an androgynous person who dresses up on Fridays, I really, really appreciate having a community that takes this so seriously, takes inclusivity so seriously. So just wanted to thank you, Brittany, for all of your work that you do on Svelte Sirens and everywhere else.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for the work that you do putting this newsletter together, because it is super helpful, and there are so many of us that read it. And I do want to provide that voice and safe space for people in the community. And I don't want anyone to be excluded either. Allies are welcome too, just so you're aware. But we welcome everyone here. As long as you're friendly, as long as you're an ally, we welcome you, and we will help support you and show off fun things with Svelte and keep doing
100%. We'll always be happy to nerd out about Svelte.
Thank you so much. And it was a pleasure to have you. I loved hearing the behind the scenes stuff from this. So thank you. And we will see all of y'all next time.
See y'all.
Bye. Later.